Everything you thought you knew about the Bible is a lie. Yes, a lie. For thousands of years, we've been told the Bible is the ultimate guide to a divine God, a God who created us, governs us, and demands our worship. But the truth? The Bible isn't about God as you've been taught. It's about something far more complex, far more controversial, and far more unsettling. The Hebrew Bible, the foundation of countless religious beliefs, does not speak of a singular, omnipotent deity. The original texts use the term Elohim. That's not a name, it's a plural noun. Not God, but gods. Plural. Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. The language is clear, deliberate, and consistent. These gods weren't metaphysical entities, omnipresent spirits, or some abstract divine concept. No, they were described as tangible beings, beings that interacted with humanity in ways that seem disturbingly familiar when you compare them to modern accounts of extraterrestrial phenomena. Here's the kicker: the Bible never claims these beings were creators of the universe. They weren't all powerful, they weren't immortal, and they certainly weren't all loving. The stories of these Elohim are stories of manipulation, control, and often outright violence. They fought wars, made deals, and chose sides. The so-called God of Israel, Yahweh, was not the universal deity we've been taught to believe in. He was one of these beings, specifically assigned to the Israelites, while other Elohim governed other nations. This wasn't divine providence, this was territorial management. In the book of Genesis, we read, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Who is us? If there is only one God, why is the language plural? The traditional explanation that this refers to the Trinity doesn't hold water. The Trinity is a concept developed centuries later. The original text clearly speaks of multiple beings. They created humans, not as an act of benevolence, but as workers, servants, laborious, designed to toil for their creators. In this light, the story of Adam and Eve isn't about a loving God giving humanity free will. It's about rebellion against these beings who sought to keep humanity subjugated, ignorant, and dependent. The manipulation doesn't stop there. Consider the story of Babel. Humanity, unified and ambitious, sought to build a tower that reached the heavens. The response? Let us go down and confuse their language so they may not understand one another. This isn't the act of a benevolent deity, but a calculated move to suppress human advancement and maintain control. These beings, these Elohim, feared human potential. They feared what humanity could become if left unchecked. Think about that. These beings, described in the Bible as gods, were threatened by us. Why? Because they weren't gods in the sense we've been led to believe. They were finite, fallible entities with their own agendas. They needed humanity, but they also needed to keep us in our place. Even more shocking is how these stories parallel ancient texts from other cultures. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, they all tell stories of beings from the heavens who came to earth, altered humanity, and demanded worship. The similarities are too consistent to dismiss. These aren't isolated myths, they are pieces of a larger, global puzzle. But here's the thing, over time, the narrative was sanitized. As monotheism gained dominance, inconvenient details were erased or reinterpreted. The plural Elohim was mistranslated as God. The physical, often brutal interactions between these beings and humans were spiritualized. What was once a record of direct encounters with powerful entities became a sacred text about an intangible, universal deity. This isn't speculation. The evidence is in the texts themselves, waiting for anyone brave enough to read them without the filters of centuries-old dogma. When you strip away the layers of theological interpretation, the Bible becomes something entirely different, not a divine guidebook, but a historical record of humanity's encounters with beings that walked among us, ruled over us, and left an indelible mark on our development. In the book of Ezekiel, there's an account so detailed, so specific, that it defies every religious explanation thrown at it. It's the description of Yahweh's kavod, often translated as glory. But if you actually read the text, you'll realize this has nothing to do with divine light or spiritual energy. Ezekiel wasn't describing a mystical experience, he was describing a machine. Ezekiel starts by saying he saw a stormy wind coming out of the north, with a massive, bright object engulfed in fire. Within this fire was something metallic, yes, metallic. Not ethereal, not spiritual, solid metal. This alone should make you pause. Then it gets even more specific. Ezekiel describes wheels within wheels, moving in perfect synchronization, covered in something resembling eyes, and capable of moving in any direction without turning. Does that sound like a metaphor? Or does it sound like a complex piece of technology? The wheels weren't just turning randomly. Ezekiel says they moved with intelligence. Wherever the main structure went, the wheels followed, as if controlled by an unseen force. And it didn't stop there. He described a sound, the roar of rushing waters, and the noise of an army. That's not how ancient people described divine glory. That's the sound of propulsion. A loud, overwhelming force of energy. What Ezekiel saw was so extraordinary, so completely alien to his understanding, that he had no words for it other than comparisons to the most advanced things his time could offer: metal, fire, wheels, and thunder. He wasn't hallucinating or having a spiritual vision. He was documenting what he saw, using the limited vocabulary of his time. This wasn't poetry, it was a desperate attempt to describe something he couldn't fully grasp. Now, think about the context of Ezekiel's time. This was a man living in the 6th century BCE, a period when the height of human engineering was the construction of large stone structures. The idea of wheels moving independently or a vehicle flying through the sky would have been incomprehensible. Yet Ezekiel provides a description that fits modern interpretations of advanced machinery, something that sounds eerily like a spacecraft or a piece of sophisticated transportation technology. The idea of Yahweh's kavod as a physical object isn't new. Many ancient cultures described their gods arriving in similarly detailed, mechanical ways. The Vedic texts of ancient India talk about Vimanas, flying chariots powered by unknown energy. The Sumerians depicted their gods using vehicles to descend from the heavens. These aren't isolated myths. These are accounts of ancient people observing something real and recording it as best they could. The Bible repeatedly describes Yahweh as descending in fire, smoke, and thunder. Think about Mount Sinai. Moses climbs the mountain, and Yahweh descends with a loud trumpet blast, and the mountain trembling as if in an earthquake. The scene is described as overwhelming, terrifying, and very, very physical. It's not a spiritual presence, it's a machine so advanced that it created awe and fear in everyone who witnessed it. Ezekiel's kavod is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that the Bible isn't describing a god in the traditional sense, but rather a being, or beings, using technology far beyond what ancient humans could understand. This wasn't divine magic. This was advanced engineering, presented to a society that had no frame of reference for such things. Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9 describes a scene where the Most High divides the nations and assigns them to the sons of God. This isn't poetry. It's a deliberate, calculated distribution of power, and it reveals something astonishing: the earth wasn't ruled by one deity. It was carved up and controlled by multiple beings, each governing their own territory. The original Hebrew text makes it clear. The term used for Most High isn't the same as Yahweh. It refers to Elyon, a figure superior to Yahweh, who presides over this division. The nations are assigned to the sons of God, a direct reference to the Elohim, beings who were not spiritual but physical entities. Yahweh, the supposed God of Israel, is given a specific portion, the Israelites. This isn't a divine plan for humanity. It's political. It's territorial. It's a hierarchy of power. In ancient cultures, gods were not abstract, all-encompassing beings. They were rulers, kings, leaders with their own agendas. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Greeks called them the Olympians. The Egyptians had their pantheon of gods who ruled specific domains. The Bible's Elyon and Elohim fit this same pattern. These weren't creators of the universe. They were managers, supervisors, beings with authority over specific regions and people. What makes this so compelling is the context. Ancient texts across the globe tell similar stories of territorial gods dividing the earth among themselves. The Sumerian texts describe how the Anunnaki allocated regions of the earth to different deities. Enlil took Mesopotamia, Enki took the Abzu, the waters, and so on. The parallels with Deuteronomy 32 are undeniable. The Bible isn't unique in this. It's part of a larger, global narrative that points to a shared history of human interaction with these beings. The evidence is everywhere in the Bible. Yahweh isn't portrayed as a universal God in the Old Testament. His tribal, focused exclusively on the Israelites. He demands loyalty, sacrifices, and absolute obedience. He wages wars against other nations, nations led by their own gods. This isn't the behavior of an all-powerful deity. This is the behavior of a regional leader, fighting to expand influence and secure dominance over his assigned territory. Even the Ten Commandments start with a glaring admission, "You shall have no other gods before me." That's not a statement denying the existence of other gods. It's an acknowledgement that they exist. Yahweh isn't saying, "I'm the only God." He's saying, "Worship me, not them." The Bible is filled with references to these rival gods: Baal, Asherah, Chemosh, Molech. These weren't false idols or figments of imagination. They were real entities with real power, directly competing with Yahweh. Deuteronomy 32 spells it out. The nations were divided, not as part of a divine plan, but as part of a political agreement among the Elohim. Yahweh got the Israelites. Other Elohim got other nations. And this division wasn't peaceful. The Old Testament is filled with stories of conflict, where Yahweh commands his people to destroy rival nations and their gods. The conquest of Canaan? That wasn't a spiritual journey. That was a military campaign to secure territory and eliminate the influence of competing Elohim. What makes this even more unsettling is the level of control these beings had over their territories. They didn't just govern, they manipulated. They dictated laws, demanded rituals, and enforced obedience through fear and violence. The Elohim weren't benevolent guardians. They were rulers who saw humanity as a resource, a means to an end. In Genesis 1 verse 26, it says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Notice the words las and hawa. This isn't the language of a singular, all-powerful God. This is a team, a group, a collective decision by the Elohim. They weren't creating out of benevolence. They were creating out of necessity. The purpose? To produce a being that could work, serve, and function according to their needs. The context becomes clearer when you consider the parallel stories from ancient Mesopotamian texts, like the Sumerian Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis epic. These texts describe the Anunnaki, beings from the heavens, facing a labor crisis. Their own kind was tired of the back-breaking work of mining resources from the earth. The solution? Create a new species to take over the labor. These accounts describe how the Anunnaki manipulated the genetic material of early hominids to create a hybrid species, humans. Sound familiar? It should. Genesis tells the same story, but from a heavily edited and theologically reinterpreted perspective. The creation of Adam wasn't a mystical event. It was a controlled experiment. The Hebrew word for create in this context, bara, doesn't mean to make something out of nothing. It means to shape, to modify, to form exactly the language you would expect for a genetic engineering process. Look at the details. Genesis 2 verse 7 says, "The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life." Dust of the ground? That's a poetic way of saying the base material, organic matter, DNA. The breath of life wasn't a divine spark. It was the activation of a modified genetic code. The Bible doesn't describe an omnipotent God conjuring humanity out of thin air. It describes the Elohim engineering a species using the resources and tools available to them. Genesis 6 verses 1-4 tells us that the sons of God, again, the Elohim, found human women attractive and took them as mates, producing offspring known as the Nephilim. This isn't a story of divine beings falling in love. It's evidence of further genetic manipulation. The Nephilim were hybrids, the result of direct genetic mixing between the Elohim and humans. They were described as giants, heroes of old, beings of extraordinary power. This isn't mythology. It's a record of experimental outcomes, proof that humanity was seen as a resource to be exploited and modified as needed. The timeline aligns perfectly with what we know from ancient history. Civilization suddenly appeared around 6,000 years ago, seemingly out of nowhere, with advanced knowledge of agriculture, architecture, and governance. The Bible credits this to the intervention of the Elohim, who taught humanity these skills. But what if it wasn't teaching? What if it was programming an upload of knowledge necessary for their plans? The implications are staggering. Humanity wasn't created to worship, to love, or to fulfill some divine purpose. We were engineered, plain and simple. And the Bible is an edited record of this manipulation. The texts from other ancient cultures confirm it. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, they all tell similar stories of beings descending from the heavens, modifying humans, and leaving behind traces of their advanced knowledge. The Bible is packed with descriptions of flying objects, mysterious lights, and unexplained phenomena that sound a lot like UFO encounters. This isn't science fiction or wild speculation. It's right there in the text, described in vivid, undeniable detail. These accounts don't fit the narrative of an invisible, omnipresent God. They fit the profile of advanced technology witnessed by ancient people who had no context for what they were seeing. Take the story of the Exodus. The Israelites were led through the desert by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. That wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical phenomenon, a consistent presence that guided them with precision. The cloud provided cover from the scorching desert sun during the day, and the fire illuminated their path at night. Think about it, an object that moves with intent, adapts to conditions, and displays such controlled behavior doesn't match the characteristics of a natural event or spiritual manifestation. It matches modern descriptions of advanced aerial vehicles. The book of Exodus goes further. When Moses ascends Mount Sinai to meet Yahweh, the mountain is covered in smoke, with fire and thunder roaring across its peaks. This wasn't divine majesty. This was the effect of a powerful craft descending onto a physical location. The Bible describes the entire mountain trembling, the air filled with the deafening sound of trumpets. These aren't poetic embellishments, they're the sensory details of a high-energy landing. Let's not forget the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark is portrayed as a sacred object, but its description reveals it was much more than that. It was a device, possibly technological in nature. The Bible specifies its dimensions, materials, and even the insulation required to handle it safely. Touching it improperly resulted in instant death, and it emitted destructive energy when carried into battle. This wasn't divine magic. It was an advanced piece of equipment, potentially generating electrical or other forms of energy far beyond what ancient humans could comprehend. One of the most overlooked examples comes from the book of Ezekiel. Beyond his detailed description of the Kavod, Ezekiel talks about seeing a firmament over the heads of the living creatures, resembling a dazzling crystal. This firmament supported a throne-like structure with a radiant figure seated upon it. The vivid imagery reads less like a religious vision and more like a first-hand account of a control module or cockpit within a craft. Even in the New Testament, unexplained aerial phenomena are present. In the book of Acts, during the conversion of Saul, later Paul, a light from heaven flashes around him, and a voice emanates from the light. This wasn't a vision or hallucination, it was a directed encounter, specific to Saul, designed to stop him in his tracks and deliver a message. The light and voice operated with intelligence and purpose, characteristics commonly reported in modern UFO encounters. What makes all this even more compelling is the consistency across ancient cultures. The Vedic texts of India describe flying chariots, or vimanas, capable of incredible speeds and maneuvers. The Egyptians depicted their gods arriving in celestial boats. Native American and Mesoamerican traditions speak of beings descending from the sky in luminous vehicles. These aren't isolated stories. They're echoes of the same encounters, observed and recorded by different civilizations. The Bible is no exception. Its descriptions align perfectly with what we'd now identify as unidentified flying objects or advanced technology. The ancient authors didn't have the vocabulary to describe propulsion systems, energy fields, or aerodynamic designs, so they used the language of their time: fire, smoke, wheels, and light. But the details, movement patterns, sounds, effects on the environment are consistent with modern UFO sightings. The Bible isn't just a collection of moral teachings or spiritual stories. It's also a war diary, one that describes brutal conflicts not just between humans, but between the Elohim themselves. These weren't battles over abstract ideas like good and evil. They were power struggles, territorial disputes, and acts of domination. And humanity? We were caught in the middle, used as pawns in a game far beyond our control. One of the clearest examples comes from the conquest of Canaan. The Israelites, under Yahweh's command, were ordered to annihilate entire nations. Men, women, children, no one was spared. This wasn't about justice or morality. It was about eliminating the influence of rival Elohim. The nations of Canaan worshipped gods like Baal, Molech, and Chemosh, gods who, like Yahweh, were part of the Elohim collective. These weren't false idols. They were real entities, each with their own followers and territories. The Bible explicitly states that Yahweh was jealous. He demanded exclusive worship and absolute loyalty. His commands to destroy Canaanite cities weren't just acts of aggression, they were moves in a calculated campaign to assert dominance over rival Elohim. The wars weren't fought for humanity's benefit. They were fought to secure Yahweh's position as the supreme power in the region. Take the story of Jericho. Yahweh didn't just tell the Israelites to capture the city. He ordered them to destroy it completely, sparing no one except Rahab, who had pledged loyalty to Yahweh's cause. The city's wealth, gold, silver, and other valuables, was to be taken and dedicated exclusively to Yahweh. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a statement to rival Elohim that their influence and resources would be stripped away. Another striking example is the confrontation between Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. This wasn't a theological debate. It was a public power play. Yahweh and Baal, two rival Elohim, were represented by their respective followers. The dramatic contest, where fire descended from heaven to consume Elijah's offering, wasn't about proving Yahweh's existence. It was a display of technological or advanced capabilities meant to intimidate Baal's followers and reaffirm Yahweh's dominance. Even the Ark of the Covenant played a role in these conflicts. In 1 Samuel 5, the Philistines captured the Ark during a battle. What happened next is telling. Wherever the Ark was taken, it brought destruction. Plagues broke out, and the statue of the Philistine god Dagon was toppled and shattered. The Ark wasn't just a religious artifact. It was a weapon, a technological device used to assert Yahweh's superiority over rival Elohim. The Bible also hints at internal conflicts among the Elohim. In Psalm 82, Yahweh is depicted standing in the divine council among the other Elohim, accusing them of failing in their duties and declaring their eventual downfall. This wasn't a spiritual allegory. It was a political confrontation, a power struggle within the ranks of these advanced beings. The wars of the Elohim weren't limited to territorial disputes. They also extended to genetic dominance. Genesis 6 describes how the sons of God took human women and produced the Nephilim, a hybrid race. This wasn't about love or divine union. It was about control, manipulating the human genome to create beings loyal to specific Elohim. The Nephilim were described as giants, mighty warriors, and rulers of ancient times. They were tools of war, designed to dominate human populations and enforce the will of their creators. These conflicts weren't limited to ancient Israel. Similar stories appear in the mythologies of other cultures. The Greek gods fought wars among themselves, dividing humanity into factions to serve their causes. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki engaging in bitter disputes, often using humans as soldiers or workers. These parallels suggest a shared history, a global pattern of advanced beings vying for power and using humanity as collateral damage. Here's the cold, hard truth: the Bible you know today is not the original story. It's been edited, rewritten, translated, and manipulated over thousands of years. What was once a raw, unfiltered account of humanity's interactions with advanced beings has been scrubbed clean to fit the narrative of monotheistic religions. The original texts, filled with detailed descriptions of the Elohim and their direct involvement in human affairs, have been sanitized, spiritualized, and stripped of their most controversial elements. It's history. The process began as early as the Babylonian exile, when Jewish scribes sought to unify their fractured identity under a single, all-powerful God. The fragmented stories of the Elohim, originally plural and diverse, were streamlined into the singular narrative of Yahweh. Words like Elohim and Bnei Ha Elohim, sons of God, were reinterpreted to remove their plural and physical implications. What once described a collective of powerful beings became rebranded as either a single deity or symbolic angels. The manipulation didn't stop there. The introduction of Christianity into the Roman Empire brought further changes. Early church leaders, aiming to consolidate their authority, made deliberate decisions about which texts to include in the canon and which to discard. Entire books and passages that contradicted the emerging doctrine of an omnipotent, singular God were excluded, labeled heretical, or outright destroyed. For example, the Book of Enoch, a text that explicitly details the actions of the Elohim and their genetic experiments with humanity, was removed from most biblical canons. Why? Because it didn't align with the emerging theological framework. Enoch's vivid accounts of the Watchers and their hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, directly challenged the narrative of a single, benevolent creator. By removing these texts, the Church not only shaped theology but erased evidence of a much more complex and controversial history. Even the texts that remained were altered through translation. Take the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Here, the plural Elohim was flattened into theos, and references to physical encounters with divine beings were spiritualized. The process continued with the Latin Vulgate and subsequent translations, each one layering additional interpretations that moved further from the original meanings. The result is what we see today, a Bible that is less a historical record and more a theological document. Key details about humanity's true origins, the role of the Elohim, and the nature of their interactions with our ancestors have been obscured or lost entirely. And yet, fragments of the truth remain, hidden in plain sight for those willing to look beyond the surface. The erasure wasn't just about rewriting the Bible. It extended to our collective memory. Ancient texts from other cultures that mirrored these stories were dismissed as myths, while biblical accounts were elevated as sacred truth. The parallels between the Elohim, the Sumerian Anunnaki, the Greek gods, and other pantheons were deliberately ignored. The global consistency in these narratives was downplayed to maintain the illusion of the Bible's uniqueness. Even today, institutions continue to discourage questioning. Modern theology often avoids the uncomfortable implications of these texts, instead focusing on allegorical interpretations that reinforce traditional beliefs. Academia, too, is cautious, hesitant to challenge long-standing paradigms for fear of controversy or professional risk. But the truth is still there, buried beneath layers of edits and translations. The Bible isn't just a book of spiritual guidance. It's a historical document, one that records humanity's interactions with beings far more advanced than us. These beings, whether you call them gods, Elohim, or something else entirely, shaped our history, our cultures, and even our biology. And for millennia, that history has been hidden, rewritten to fit a narrative of control and conformity. Thank you for watching this video and joining me in this journey into the untold history of humanity. If you found this eye-opening, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this with others who are ready to question everything they thought they knew. Let's keep uncovering the truth together. See you next time.